If 10% of you is physical and 90% of you is spiritual, that means that in order for you to manifest anything in your life, 10% of you needs that vain goal. That's Boo Fam, peace and blessing. This is Derric, RauKhu, more. And wanted to go ahead and just jump right into this video. I've been wanting to make this video for the longest time, so here we are. And what I found out, the reason why I stopped trying to be spiritual is because I realized something, and that is that there's a lot of people who have some hang-ups about religion. They have hang-ups about Christianity, hang-ups about the church, hang-ups about, even Jehovah's Witness, the Kingdom Hall. They have some hang-ups about these religions. And they haven't addressed these issues. And because they have not addressed these issues, they've superimposed a lot of those hang-ups and a lot of those religious beliefs and dogmatic ways of doing things. They've superimposed them into Kemetic spirituality. And they've made Kemetic spirituality a religion, even though Kemetic spirituality is not a religion. Okay? Now, I say that because I remember when I first went ahead and I started learning about Kemetic spirituality, when I first got on the path, like a lot of you, I went ahead, the first thing I learned about was the history. After I learned the history, I learned about the Kemetic history. Then I came across Stolen Legacy by George and James. And in the process of reading that, I learned about the quote-unquote Kemetic mystery systems. Okay, I say quote-unquote mainly because the Kemetic people never referred to their spirituality as a mystery system. That was something that basically occurred on the outside. Foreigners referred to it as a mystery system, but not the Kemetic people. To kind of get an idea what I mean by that, think about food. Think about Chinese food. Chinese people never call their food Chinese food. Okay, it's people on the outside that call it Chinese food. So it's the same thing with the Kemetic people. They never refer to it as Kemetic spirit or as Kemetic philosophy. This is their way of doing things. This was their philosophical and spiritual way of doing things. So once I went ahead and I understood that, that's when I later on started delving into different philosophies. And from the different philosophies, that's when I eventually came across this whole thing of what is referred to as left brain or left hemisphere way of thinking versus right hemisphere way of thinking. Now, according to theory, Western philosophy is based upon left hemisphere way of thinking. And if you're not familiar with left and right hemisphere brain thinking, the idea or the theory is that if you're from the left hemisphere way of thinking, you do things from a totally logical, segregative, rational, scientific way of doing things, okay? Basically, you like to take things apart, okay? And this is what a lot of left hemisphere, like I said, in theory, this is what Western philosophy and Western way of doing things, the Western culture, how they do things. This is the reason why science is separated from religion. Religion is separated from spirituality. Spirituality is separated from healing. Healing is separated from medicine, so forth and so on, okay? Versus right hemisphere way of thinking or right hemisphere brain thinking, they put things together. They like to see how things go ahead and they correlate between each other, how there are associations between things. So they see, so an example is, I would say, like acupressure and acupuncture. In acupressure and acupuncture, basically, you have energy, the energy of the meridians, how they correspond to certain organs and and certain points of those organs that correspond to certain brain patterns and all that kind of stuff. Okay, that's just basically give you an example of right hemisphere way of thinking and left hemisphere way of thinking. When you go ahead, you learn about this. Okay, when I learned about this, basically I end up learning, and eventually I end up finding out and discovering that you have Western way of thinking and Western philosophy and Western culture versus non-Western culture, or what is relatively, or for the most part, referred to as Eastern way of thinking. Okay. Once you go ahead, and once I went ahead and I got to that, I should say, once I went ahead and I got to that way of thinking, and I'm able to go ahead and make that comparison and contrast and all that, because I did not have a wise individual in my space and someone who was financially successful in my space, because I didn't have that, what ended up happening was that I ended up going down this rabbit hole. And excuse me, as I went down, spiraled down this rabbit hole, I come across these people who are quote unquote spiritual. They're financially broke, by the way, but they're spiritual. They're quote unquote spiritual. And one of the things that they promoted is that you're supposed to be, the whole thing of pursuing the Kemetic thing is you're supposed to be Osiris in this space. You're supposed to be God in the physical in this space, and you're supposed to be Osir or Osiris, like I said, up in this joint. Okay. And that's what you're supposed to be pursuing. That's your spiritual goal. Okay. Now, mind you, like I said, I didn't have a wise individual in my life, or when I was on this journey, when I started this journey, I didn't have a wise individual. And that individual also was not financially successful. And because of that, here you have these, spiritual people who are basically telling me this, and this is what I end up pursuing. And as I end up pursuing this, here I am trying my best, trying to be Osiris up in this joint, trying to be Osir, or because the whole idea is the way it was promoted, the way it was told, I want to be Osir or I want to be Osiris because I want to be all powerful. Okay? It wasn't until, I can't remember actually, it wasn't until I ended up meeting Papa. Those of you I've talked about Papa, my mentor. It wasn't until I went ahead and I met him that I began to see, what these individuals were talking about was nonsense. Okay? And it was totally not possible. Okay? And excuse me, not only was it not possible, a lot of these individuals who claim to be spiritual, and like I said, they claim to be spiritual, they got religious hang-ups, and they superimposed a lot of this religious beliefs, these religious dogmatic beliefs onto Kemetic spirituality. As a result, being Osiris or seer-like or whatever you want to call it is almost the equivalent of Christians waiting for the rapture. It's something that may happen and something that may not happen. But it's not grounded in reality. Okay? So when I realized that, and I realized that these individuals basically they superimposed this religious thinking into, Kemetic spirituality. Once I realized that, that's when I basically, like I said, I gave up on this. I stopped trying to pursue being spiritual. And it was interesting. Once I started trying to be spiritual and just focused on my everyday life and applying Kemetic spirituality, or applying the spiritual aspect to things, to regular trials and tribulations. When I did that, I became more spiritual. Okay? I know that sounds odd, but the theory is this. Remember, RauKhu, he wears the white and red crown. And according to lore, RauKhu goes ahead and he's able to defeat Set because Osir intervenes on his behalf. Now, of course, that's just story and all that kind of stuff, but from a metaphysical and spiritual perspective, what it's referring back to is the fact that when you look at this reality that we're living in, you look at this physical reality and you look at the things that are going on in our society, okay, they're going on in this society. If you're able to go ahead and do rituals and you talk to your ancestors, you talk to your spirit guides, and you're able to bring some of that wisdom back and impart it into this physical reality, this corrupted society, don't you make it a little bit better if you're able to do that? Aren't you able to improve the quality of life of your family and of your life and your family and friends when you're able to do that? Okay? Yeah, you are. And that's the idea behind it. And once I went ahead, like I said, and I realized that, that's when I began to think. And I began to understand. You see, a lot of spiritual people, they get it wrong. And again, I'm not trying to throw blame and shade and light, or any light, or for that matter, on any of these individuals. I'm just basically trying to go ahead and I'm expressing my perspective and then telling you my opinion of how I see these things. But when you approach things from that perspective and you look at it from that perspective, and what I've found is that a lot of people who quote unquote claim to be spiritual, they miss the fact that knowledge of self does not just refer to knowing your history. Knowledge of self does not just refer to knowing, the parts of your brain and all that kind of stuff. That's not knowledge. That's not what knowledge of self deals with. When the Kemetic people referred to, and they said, know thyself, what they were actually talking about is knowing and understanding that you are the universe. Okay? Ponder on that for a little bit. Understanding you are the universe. If I break that down just a little bit, allow me to break that down just a little bit. What that means is 10% of your being is physical. 10% of this, of who I am, is physical. The remaining 90% is spiritual. Okay? Think about that for a minute. Let's break it down a little bit further. If 10% of you is physical and 90% of you is spiritual, that means that in order for you to manifest anything in your life, 10% of you needs that vain goal. 10% of you needs some kind of motivation, some kind of tangible motivation in order to make things work. Okay? To give you an example of what I mean by that, like a lot of people, I went ahead and I tried to lose weight. I wanted to lose weight. And like a lot of people, went ahead and I had all these lofty little reasons of why I wanted to lose weight, why I wanted to get in shape. Because I wanted to be healthy. Because I wanted to, wanted to be able to go ahead and do healthy things. I wanted to adopt a certain dietary lifestyle and all that kind of stuff because it's better for the environment, and all that kind of stuff. None of that junk motivated me. None of that junk motivated the 10% of my reality, the 10% of my being to get healthy. You know what motivated me to go ahead and get healthy and basically to exercise and everything? I enrolled in a Muay Thai class. And I'm not saying you got to do that. I'm just saying I enrolled in a Muay Thai class, into a fighting class. And the reason why I ended up losing weight is because instead of me focusing on losing weight for all these little different reasons, I ended up focusing on, pardon my language, I wanted to learn how to kick a person's ass real quick. I wanted to be able to fight quickly. That was it. So in other words, I kicked in for my 10%, the 10% physical part of my being. I kicked in the survival aspect of it, of fighting for survival. That was the motivating factor that went ahead and led me to losing weight. So if you say, for instance, you want to lose weight, you need a vain, tangible goal, such as you want to look good in a bikini. You want to look good in a two-piece. Okay? You want to look good in a thong. I know you ain't supposed to say that because, quote unquote, we're spiritual. But the 10% of our being is physical. And that's how you motivate it. This is knowledge of self. Okay? And this is what a lot of people, like I said, a lot of spiritual people, they miss. And the reason why they miss it is because they've superimposed the whole religious dogmatic way of thinking onto Kemetic spirituality. So, again, once I realized this, that's when I stopped trying to be spiritual and just focused on tangible goals. Because that's what part of my being wants. When I started focusing on tangible goals, my wife and I are going ahead and we need to go ahead, we need to work on some things. Let's do a ritual. Okay? Because I want to go ahead and I want to improve the relationship between my wife and I. That's a tangible goal. My child goes ahead and they're having some issues at school. Do a ritual. Because that's a tangible goal. And that allows me to go ahead, once I do the ritual, I'm able to see the results. That's the 10% of the reality that we need. Okay? So that's the reason why I stopped being spiritual. I stopped focusing on being spiritual. And as soon as I stopped focusing on being spiritual, I became more spiritual. And again, like I said, I'm not trying to throw shade on anyone or light on anyone. I'm just basically trying to go ahead and say that the whole idea of becoming Osiris in this piece, the whole idea of doing that is really, it's a long-term goal. It's not going to happen overnight. It ain't going to happen next week. For a lot of us, it may not happen in the next 2-3 generations or 2-3 lifetimes. It's a long time goal. So in the meantime, instead of going ahead and focusing on that, focus on the reality. Focus on tangible things. And in the process of focusing on tangible things, you go ahead and you get there. Okay? So hopefully that gave you a little bit more insight. Hopefully that helps you in your pursuit, in your journey. If you got any comments, questions, or suggestions, as usual, go ahead and drop me a line. Until next time, head to Boo, fam. Peace.